So the question was asked during the break. How much do you share of your own story, particularly if you didn't, if you were sexually active or, if you had some other stuff? And I guess the way we usually put it is, it's a question people ask. You're not there to tell them all your sins, okay? And we're not asking them to tell us theirs either. The point is we're trying to help them, much like I said, the analogy of a doctor asking you if you smoke or you have, if you drink a fifth of scotch every night or something. They have to know that for your own personal health. We want to try to get them to be a healthy married couple. You want to share with them from your own life whatever you've learned that has a purpose to your sharing. So that if you were sexually active before marriage and somebody challenged you and you stopped having sex before marriage and you saw some goodness in that and you grew, you want to say to the engaged couple, we're sharing this with you not because we're proud of it, but we learned and we were abstinent for those several months and it really did help us, and we want to encourage you that this is the best thing to do. But you don't have to, worry about trying to expose yourself unnecessarily if, to the engaged couple, if it's uncomfortable.
One other question came up that I thought was worth elaborating on. The question was asked whether or not you have couples, we talked about this being a process for discernment. If you ever have couples decide not to get married, and yes, we have. We've had at least 5, I think, over the years that have, during the course of the preparation process, reached a conclusion that we probably shouldn't get married. We've made them shine a light on so many issues that they're realizing that they just continue to butt heads and it's not going to go away, and so that they really want to step forward. Now, we always say that the embarrassment of a called off wedding is nothing compared to the pain of a divorce, and so this is successful marriage prep. It's a little awkward at times when it happens, but it is successful marriage prep, and you've done your job. And in many of those instances, we've seen one or 2 of those couples who were involved, and they're very appreciative of having been spared that difficult.
We had one bride give the engagement ring back on the sofa, in our home. So but they realized it was just not going to work.
Yeah, it was the right answer for them.
We had another couple. They called us up the Tuesday before the Saturday wedding. All the invitations are out, everything's paid for, and they called us up crying, because the groom had just called off the wedding and could they come talk to us. They both came and we sat down and he said, you all have taught us, the thing you've taught us a lot in marriage preparation is that we're going to stand at that altar and we're going to have to answer 3 questions that are part of every Catholic wedding. And the first question that at every wedding is asked is, bride and groom, have you come here freely and without reservations to give yourselves in love to each other? And each of you has to answer yes. And he said, the more I thought about that question, the more I realized I don't feel like I have no reservations. I have a lot of serious reservations about the future of our life together, and I just can't go through with the wedding. And they called it off.
And this was a cohabiting couple.
This was a cohabiting couple. So the fact that they called it off, his parents were gracious about it. I mean, obviously they lost a lot of money, because it was the Tuesday night before the Saturday wedding. But I think they spared themselves a lot of heartache, and they didn't bring children into a relationship that was going to be problematic. So, okay, let's try to get through expectations before we have lunch. Jody, is lunch being delivered or what?
No, but there's bringing it.
Okay, fine, thank you. Okay, so what I try to do. Go ahead.
So just want to touch briefly. So the couple comes back. So it's your second meeting, and they come back in, and you welcome, chit chat a little bit. We usually start with a little prayer, kind of just a little spontaneous prayer, and then Jan will start the homework review with those questions on that sheet. So what did you learn about yourself? What did you learn about your fiance over the last couple of weeks?
All right, now this is a practical piece of information. You have to decide between the 2 of you who's going to take the lead on each of the parts, because you both need to do the talking. It's not good for the engaged couple to see only the wife do all the talking and the husband just sits there, stoked, okay? You've got to both be equally sharing yourself, equally sharing your stuff. Now, I'll tell you how Lloyd and I have sort of done it. You have to find what's easiest for you. My gift is to be able to sort of take the scalpel into the interior and help them with processing the homework. Try to make connections, try to ask them questions, to make them go a little deeper, be more self-reflective. So I generally take the lead in processing the homeworks. That doesn't mean Lloyd doesn't say anything, he does, but it's probably maybe 60-40, you know, I'm taking the lead in that. Then when we get to the presentation of the new materials, Lloyd probably does the greater part of the teaching there. I'll come in with examples, but he takes the greater part of the teaching, because you don't want to be tripping all over each other, and it's more time effective if one of you is taking the lead. So you have to decide between the two of you which you feel more drawn to and which you feel more comfortable with. Mm-hmm. And so you're going to see, because Lloyd is going to take the lead now and just present the new material for you. So basically what I would do at this point after the opening prayer, and then we ask, now, what'd you learn about yourself? What'd you learn about your beloved? What was your deepest insight? And then I'll say, okay, was there an exercise you did for homework that really generated the most discussion? And usually they'll take one. I say, okay, let's start with that one. And then we don't go through every question on every homework, but this is why you have to do the homework exercises yourselves. Get a feel for what elicits a lot of conversation. And then on each of the homeworks, we have maybe 3 or 4 of the questions that we will ask them what they answered on those 3 or 4 questions, because it gives us a flavor of how they did on the whole exercise. So we don't ask them every one, because you'd be there for 4 or 5 hours. So we go through it and we pick out 3 or 4 that we know are going to elicit enough so we get the idea that they did the exercise and they got something out of it. If it looks like they just kind of hurriedly did the exercise, we'll try to hold their feet to the fire and make them go a little bit deeper and understand and draw some connections. But that's basically how you're going to share the homework. And it's always helpful then to say, like Lloyd said at the end of the last session, oh, I was thinking about what you just answered on that homework and how it relates to your family of origin story. And I remember you said this about your mother or your brother or your dad or something. And that, again, helps them to draw a connection that this is all one piece and that this family of origin stuff is the fundamental lens through which you're going to process the whole, experience.
Yeah, so your goal, particularly in the family of origin homeworks, is to help them connect the dots, help them to see some of the patterns that perhaps you see. And so if you see like one of them is sensitive about conflict, so it's like my story. Well, because you saw a lot of conflict, you're uncomfortable with it. So know where that's coming from. These family of origin patterns are things that are not easily shaken, particularly the ones that are formed early. So the best we can do is to be able to identify where they are. One thing I notice nowadays, I use this as an example, probably when many of you were kids, like I was, you had a teacher who would crack you on the knuckles if you were holding your pen right. They don't do that anymore. I have grandkids that draw like this. I have grandkids that draw like this. I don't know how the heck they hold a pencil, but nobody corrects them anymore. The pattern that you used to write when you were 7 years old, you'll be using when you're 70 years old. You're not going to change that pattern. And I could look at you and I could say, that is the craziest pattern. Why do you do that? How can you write that way? You're not going to change that pattern. So some of these patterns of family of origin, they're very difficult to change, but awareness is half the battle to know where those sensitivities come from. One other caveat that we would caution here when you do the family of origin stories, and we usually end with this caution, in the previous meeting when the couple leaves, but there's a real tendency to want to be loyal to your family, So a couple may be very vulnerable and very open with us, and then when a week later, when they sit down and do this homework, that sense of loyalty and protectedness of their family may come up, and they might try to sugarcoat or whitewash some issues. And if you remember their story and have some notes, again, you can challenge them on it. I'm surprised you really didn't mention anything about, when your dad was out of work and the stress that you went through, or the bit about, the infidelity that you talked about. And, that didn't come up. I was surprised. Yeah. Well, yeah, so again, you're trying to help them connect the dots. So that's where those notes really come in handy.
All right, any questions about that? Do you kind of see where we are? Okay, so let's go ahead and we're going to do the teaching part of the expectations. I see our lunch is here, but we're going to try to get through this whole presentation before we have lunch.
Yeah. So what we'll do here is let's read the goal of the session. So we're on page 45. And we'll read the little box at the top before we get started. This session is intended to help the engaged couple to understand that all close personal relationships experience recurring cycles of highs and lows, and to give them the tools to address the inevitable periods of disillusionment that every couple experiences. Most importantly, the engaged couple must come to understand that love is a decision, not a feeling. It is an act of the will, a choice. The rule of thumb to present over and over again to the engaged couple is choose to love. Marital fidelity and commitment form the glue that binds a relationship in times of trial. As the presenting couple, you should share the joy of your journey by relating honestly experiences of romance, disillusionment, and the joy of a mature love based on commitment to your love for one another. This presentation also addresses financial decision-making as a principal source of stress for newly married couples. So there's a little bit of background information that you'll see, in each section about how to review the homework. And so then after the homework is done, and it's about an hour, 45 minutes to an hour, ask them if they want some water, need a bathroom break, whatever, and then you begin the session. So what you see here now is a more typical outline section. And so what we're trying to do, this is not intended to be a script. It's intended to be an outline of key points that you are to raise. And so we're on page 46, and we're going to start talking about the phases of relationship. So the goal is to kind of, in your own words, lay out some of these principles and personalize them. So tell your own story about how you experienced this in your relationship. Make it unique to your experience. So I'll give you a little bit of hint of how we do this in the first 2 pages. So some people will ask sometimes, at trainings, well, do I sit here with this manual in front of me? Well, no, it's, if you need the pages, you can kind of, flip it open and just take the pages and have them sit on your lap. But it's best not to have a big manual sitting in front of you. Eventually, you'll get to a point where you can talk this either off the top of your head, or you'll have like a little 1 page just to have an idea of the outline. So we want it to be personal, want it to be your own words. So we'll show you a little bit how we do the first 2 pages. So I'll say it's good that we dealt with family of origin first, because this really sets a lot of patterns and expectations about what you think your family life is going to be like once you're married. And so what we want to focus on tonight is the fact to recognize that our marriage relationship, like any other serious relationship, isn't constantly just one constant step upward and higher and better. But instead, there's some highs and lows. There's some peaks and valleys, and I don't want to imply that it's a roller coaster, but there's definitely a little bit of a cycle to it. And sometimes things seem to be going great in your marriage, and you're thrilled with it, and other times things seem to be coming apart, and you don't know what happened. And so for purposes of understanding this dynamic, which is very normal, and you'll go through many times, we're going to identify sort of three stages of this that we want to talk about. The first stage is what we call romance. Romance is that stage when everything's wonderful and hunky-dory. The next stage is disillusionment, when things seem to be, coming apart and things seem horrible. And then there's a stage called mature love or true joy. And so we want to take each of these and explore what's going on with that stage in our relationship, and why are we experiencing that? So let's start with romance. So romance is that wonderful, giddy stage when you just can't get enough of each other. You just want to pinch yourself. You can't believe how fortunate you are to have this person in your life. And while you can certainly have periods of romance in a long-standing relationship, and Jan and I still have periods of romance, thankfully, it's easier to connect to the romance if you think back on what it was like when y'all first started dating, you know? So, think about what it was like when you just had that giddiness about yourself, that silliness. You couldn't wait to be together. You couldn't wait. Oh, this weekend we're going to get together. I can't wait. I can't wait to see him or her this weekend. I wonder what they're doing. Or you send a little card, or you send a little note, or send a little text. You're just that eagerness. And what's happening in romance is that you're very other-centered. All you can think about is the other person. You're totally focused on the other person. And so I remember, I'll share the story. What you want to do here is to sort of, tell a little silly story to kind of put a giggle on their face to let them think about what your romance was like. So Jan and I met. I was a junior, she was a freshman, and we both went to the same college. And the great thing about that college, while it was located in the city of New Orleans, it was right across from one of the biggest municipal parks in the city. So they had these beautiful walkways and gazebos and ponds, and so often we would sneak off during the day or before the school ended, because we were both commuter students, and we'd take a walk in the park, this beautiful park. And Jan will say that there's a tree stump we found in the park that she could stand on, and she could kiss me without breaking her neck because I'm so much taller than her, So, so you had this, and so as I think about, we dated for 3 years. I said, there were a lot of really fun memories. I play guitar, and we get together with friends and go sit on a seawall and sing and play music, dances, and we had our little hiccups along the way, but by and large, I really think of our courtship as 3 years just really of a lot of romance. And I said to myself, that often that the happiest day of my life wasn't the day of my wedding, because the day of your wedding is sort of fraught with anxiety, is it going to rain, or the limos are going to show up? But the day after my wedding, to wake up in the arms of the woman I wanted to spend the rest of my life with. And that's what romance feels like. It's wonderful and it's awesome. Unfortunately, it doesn't always last. And what happens is, life gets busy, and all of a sudden you begin to recognize the fact that you're paying a price for this relationship. There's a cost. It's not just all about, roses and walks in the park. And for me and Jan, one of the challenges for us, one of the foolish things we did, was we got married in February, and I'm a CPA. CPAs, work crazy hours from January to April. And sure enough, we got married in February, because that was the earliest we could get married. She just finished school in December. And we got married in February, and we took like a 3-day honeymoon, and then I'm back at work 60 hours a week, And then my mother, who was suffering from leukemia, wound up going into a hospital 3 weeks after we were married and died a week later. So we had to deal with all of that, selling an estate. An estate sounds like a fancy term. It was really a very small, modest house, but I had to be the one to sell it. I had to deal with all of this on behalf of my brothers because they were living out of town. We had all that to deal with. A week or two later, we find out she's pregnant, expecting our first child. So she's feeling morning sick. And so I'm working 60 hours a week. We're dealing with all this mess with my mom's death. We were with her when she died. We were very young. She was 21, I was 23. What happened? You talk about going to fast forward. Where are those walks in the park? Come on, And so that happens, that sense of disillusionment. And what happens in disillusionment is whereas in romance, the focus is totally on the other person, in disillusionment, look at the price I'm paying for this relationship. Look at what I have to do. How come I'm having to do all this? Where is he or she when I need him? It's that pity party we go in. And it could be any number of things. So there's a number of examples here on the page that may trigger it for you. When you talk about something that you went through, And maybe, ours is probably a little fast forward. Some people, get a period of romance a little bit longer early in the marriage, and maybe they don't experience deep disillusionment until 6 months or a year down the road. But we've all experienced it, and it's helpful to let them know that you will experience it. So we kind of paint that picture, make it a kind of a giddy, happy time, and lower the temperature in the room and say, oh gosh, that must have been tough. That had to feel awkward, And so then we turn the page, and before we talk about this natural cycle that before we tell you how to deal with disillusionment and how you pull yourself out of disillusionment, we want to take a few minutes and talk about why does disillusionment set in. And a lot of times disillusionment sets in because we go into marriage with false expectations and assumptions. A lot of those expectations are shaped by the family of origin, particularly if you grew up in a happy family. You want it to be just like the family you grew up in. Or if you grew up in an unhappy family, you don't want it to be anything like the family you grew up in. And inevitably, the other person you're marrying has different expectations, so those expectations can clash. So expectations can set you up for disillusionment. But beyond that, there are a number of falsehoods in our culture that'll set you up for disillusionment. And so this is on the next 2 pages are 5 or 6 topics that can possibly set you up for disillusionment. We don't necessarily handle all 6. We'll maybe handle 3, whatever ones you feel most comfortable talking about. But one of the ones we always handle is that very first one. Marriage is a 50-50 partnership. Boy, what a crock. I mean, we know that because, and we always say that for various reasons. It could be health issues, it could be family challenges, it could be any number of things. One of you is never going to be able to quite give as much as the other. And sometimes it may be you groom, sometimes it may be you bride, but thinking that marriage is a 50-50 proposition also further implies that somebody's keeping score. And that's step number 1. You don't want to keep score. And so we'll tell the story of Jan's parents when the mom was diagnosed with cancer. And that last year, particularly of her life, there was no 50-50 going on. You were lucky if it was 90-10. This poor woman was just hanging on by a thread. And yet we saw Jan's dad being so attentive, so solicitous. I said, this is what it's all about. So the goal isn't necessarily 50-50. The goal isn't even. It's gonna vary, but the goal is 100-100. We use the analogy sometimes. It's sort of like when they build a bridge. They don't just start off on 2 banks of the river and just meet in the middle. What do? They overlay, huh? So that when there's a stress fracture, there's something that happens to part of the structure stays together. So don't go thinking that marriage is going to always be equal. It's going to always be 50-50. Instead, our goal should be we expect to give more than we get back. And if that's our goal, we'll do okay. One of the others I like to mention is the top of page 49. I'll be able to change the things I don't like about my spouse after we're married. We always say here, people don't change their personalities and they don't change their character after they're married. The only way someone's going to change their character is perhaps if they have a religious conversion. But your personalities or your character, your value system is going to be the same. Now your behaviors can change, but only if you want to change your behavior. So if one of you tends to be habitually tardy or a little messier than the other, and that bothers the other person, you say, okay, well, I can do better at that if they want to, but you can't force another person to change a habit that you personally find uncomfortable. If anything, the habit that drives you crazy now is going to drive you more crazy after you get married. There's a cute little cartoon we came across a few years ago, and it's a middle-aged couple, and they're sitting at their breakfast table, and they have their wedding album open, and the wife is looking at the husband, and she says, I always knew the 2 would become 1, but I just assumed I was the one we would become. Isn't that the way we've all been there at some point? So that's one that we always mention, and then you might pick 1 or 2 others that seem to relate to you. And then we come back to this issue of disillusionment, and we'll say, so how do you know you're in disillusionment? Well, the best way is to listen to your self-talk. Hear the way you're thinking about your life. Hear the way, whether you're driving your car or you're washing dishes, when you begin hearing yourself saying things like, I'm putting out a lot more in this relationship than he or she is. Or, did I make a mistake? Boy, he or she's really changed. I wonder what that old boyfriend or girlfriend's doing. When you start thinking like that, you're in disillusionment and you're going down that slope. And if you don't catch yourself, it's going to go into deeper disillusionment, into misery, and end in divorce. Now, I don't think it's coincidental that the sociologists will tell us that most, first of all marriages will experience a period of deep disillusionment, usually in the first 18 to 24 months of marriage. It's normal. It's normal. So I tell engaged couples, don't panic when it happens to you. This is normal. But I don't think it's coincidental that most marriages that end in divorce end in years 4 or 5. Because you see, they get to that point of disillusionment at 24 months, 2 years of marriage. They don't know how to deal with it. They drift along, go into misery. A year later, they're separated and divorced. So the good news is that there is a way to pull out of that cycle, to pull yourself back up into a more mature love. And the key is it's a 2-step process. It sounds easy and simple. It works. It's not necessarily easy. But step number 1 is to recognize that love is a decision you make. It's a choice you make to love a person. It's not about how you feel. You know, you can wake up one morning and feel like going to work, and next morning you don't. It depends on how you slept last night, what you ate last night, etc. Our choices are the ones that guide our lives. And so at some point, while you knew a number of people, and you could have probably been happily married to a dozen people, but at some point, the good Lord had a hand in bringing the 2 of you together, and at some point, you made the choice for this one. Instead of forsaking all others, I choose you to be my spouse. And that's the choice that is going to hold you together. It's another word for commitment. It's a choice that's going to keep you together. It's that the commitment you make to one another when the feelings aren't there, that commitment. So we tell a story, it's captured here at the bottom of the page, a true story of a priest friend that we knew who had discerned at about age 18 that he really felt called to priesthood. But he had some family obligations, and he wasn't free to go off and do this till his siblings were a little bit older. And he wound up entering the priesthood, entering the seminary in his 30s, and did become a priest. And and he had a wonderful career as a priest. And then one of his parishioners knew this story about him, that there was some unusual journey about his journey to priesthood. And so she hails him down after Mass one day and says, Father, I've been meaning to ask you, when did you choose to be a priest? Without batting an eye, he said, this morning when I was shaving. He said, every day I got to make a decision. Am I going to be a phony with a Roman collar on, or am I going to be a priest to God's people? And so too, we as married people have to often make that choice every day. Am I going to be a phony with a wedding ring on, or am I really going to be a spouse to this person? Huh? So step number 1 in the process is to renew your choice to love. I choose to love. And what you may have to do is you may have to say it to yourself. You may have to shout it from the rooftops. You may have to be in your car saying, I don't feel very much in love right now, but I choose to love this person. I choose to love. And then step number 2 is to do some concrete action in accordance with step number 1. Act like it. Show your spouse that you're all in, that you have chosen to love, that you are committed to the relationship, and darn it, I'm here for you. I'm going to be here for you. Now, I don't know how many of you saw the movie that was out several years ago. It was popular in some Christian circles, called Fireproof. Anybody recognize that movie, Fireproof? It was, the story, Fireproof story was about, I think it was Kirk Cameron or whatever. The Fireproof story, there was a couple, they're a childless couple, but they were fighting like cats and dogs. Their marriage was obviously unraveling. And the guy was a firefighter, and the woman had a marketing job at a hospital. And so there's absolutely no sense of unity between them, and she's on the verge of having an affair with some guy at the hospital, and the guy's the firefighter's father was a man of faith, and he challenged him to take what's called the love dare of using biblical principles to try to show a commitment and love to his wife, back it up every day. And you saw in that film, over the course of about 3 weeks of a marriage that was heading down to ruin, all of a sudden start to turn around. And it ends with them renewing their vows. It's well done. But it's the same sort of principle here, because what modern psychology has told us, that when we make a choice of our will and back it up with specific concrete action, our feelings eventually get in tow. Our feelings get on the train, So the analogy I often use, a lot of times these couples are, maybe not too far since they've been out of high school or college, is to think about some activity or sport or student council or theater or some commitment that you had when you were in school. So I was a basketball player, and I said, I remember after about 2 months of basketball practice, I was fried. I said, okay, I still like the sport, but do we really need to practice every day? I don't want to be here every day, And there were times, I'm sure you've all experienced this, where you had to give yourself that pep talk and say, okay, I really don't feel like this, but I have an obligation to my teammates, so I'm just going to gut it out. I'm just going to, tighten my belt, and I'm just going to gut it out, and it'll be over in a couple hours. And you do that, and 15, 20 minutes into the practice, you're clicking, okay, this isn't too bad. Before you know it, practice is over, you move on. We do this unknowingly. Often we catch ourselves doing this in our everyday responsibilities, our everyday jobs. Just sort of making that commitment, okay, I don't want to be here, but I'm just going to push, and before you know it, your feelings get along for the ride. The same dynamic can work in our marriages. It won't be that instantaneous. It won't be 15 minutes, but it can happen over a period of time, that over sustained effort of making that choice to love, backing it up with concrete commitment, is that you begin to feel that downward slope pull out, and you get to a point, this third stage, which we call mature joy or mature love, true joy. Unlike romance, where in romance, you're looking at the person and all you see are their wonderful attributes and you're totally other focused. And disillusionment, when you're looking at yourself and you're seeing all their faults and problems. In that stage of mature love, you look at your spouse and you see his or her wonderful attributes and their shortcomings, but you're committed to them and you love them and you hear from them. And when you think about it, the deepest desire in each of our hearts is to be fully known and fully loved for who we are, where we don't have to wear masks with each other. And so when you begin to experience that you know my junk and you hear from me, you're committed to me, you love me, all of a sudden, you're up in romance again. And you have those wonderful periods of romance and things are great and it's just wonderful and joyful. And then life gets busy and we start taking each other for granted again, and we start that slope down to disillusionment. But hopefully, once you understand this dynamic, you listen to your self-talk. And you start hearing yourself with that pity party coming on. And you say, I'm in disillusionment. I gotta make this decision to love. I gotta make this decision to love. I gotta act on it. And I'm gonna turn it around. And sure enough, that's what happens. So even after 43 years of marriage, I say we still have our little periods of disillusionment, but because we understand the dynamic and we know how to pull ourselves out of it, our periods of disillusionment are far more shallow than they were early in our marriage. It's sort of like the little rock skipping on the stone. It doesn't go very deep. The water, rather. The rock skipping on the water. It doesn't go very deep. And you catch yourself. So it's a very wonderful, pragmatic tool, but it's all driven by that sense of decision. So that's sort of a gist of what we've shared here. And again, to the extent you can personalize this with your own stories of how you've had to apply this principle, can really be fruitful.
And again, I let Lloyd do the whole teaching just now because we're kind of crunched for time. We wanted to get this in before lunch. So I would be the one kind of sharing some stories back and forth as he was giving the teaching part. I'd help him with some of the examples. So your work is going to be kind of not only getting the sense of the process, but also thinking back on some of your early experiences of romance and disillusionment and being able to share some of those examples.
Yeah. So on page 52, the second paragraph asks them to, before we talk on finances, to, ask them, can they relate to that? Have you experienced in your own relationship, bride and groom, have you experienced some of those feelings of romance and disillusionment? Did you ever get so disillusioned that you thought this wasn't going to work? And, do you feel that difference? And they said, yeah, we've been through that. And I remember that time we broke up, and we got back together. And we say, okay, I just want you to remember, this is going to happen again. That wasn't a one-time cycle. This is going to happen again. It's normal. Don't panic. But remember that this is part of a mature relationship. And how do you pull yourself out? So then we end the night talking on page 52 with the survey results of a study that was done by Creighton University, a Jesuit school in Omaha. Did a study in the year 2000 about the major sources of disillusionment. They didn't use that term, but they tried to they surveyed newly married couples for a number of years, and they tried to identify what were the major issues that caused the most conflict and difficulty in your relationship. And the title of the study gives away their findings, because the study is entitled Time, Sex, and Money, the First 5 Years of Marriage. And while they found 25 or more different factors that created difficulties for the couple, clearly these three fall far away from the others. Number one, time. You're getting married to this person because you want to spend time with them. You like them. They're my best friend. I just want to have more time with them. And sadly, you're never going to have as much time as you think you're going to have with them. And the time you do have isn't always your best time of the day, end of the day, and you're tired and you have children to deal with and so forth. So that's a big disappointment for many young couples. They don't have as much quality time as they want. Secondly, sex, not so much that they don't enjoy the marital embrace, but because of issue number one, because of the lack of time, it's not as frequent or spontaneous as they'd hoped it would be. So that creates some dissatisfaction. And then third is the issue of finances. And couples today, a lot of them are bringing student loan debt and all kind of other debt into the marriage. And it's a real challenge to kind of make the numbers work the first couple of years, and it can put a lot of strain on a marriage. So what we typically would say here is that, we're going to deal a little bit with the time issue when we deal with communications next time. So we'll save that. We're going to deal with the sexuality issue when we deal with the subject of sexuality later on. But tonight is the only night that we have that little window to kind of talk about finances, if that's an issue for you. Now, there are I know some marriage prep programs that spend a tremendous amount of time on finances, and there's no question that finances are an issue for many couples. But I'd have to tell you that probably most of the couples we deal with, for maybe 2/3 of them, it is not an issue, because they probably made their mistakes already. So your typical couple, I would say by and large, is probably mid to late 20s, and many of them have made the mistake, have gotten in credit card debt when they were in college or in high school. Many of them are so conservative now they won't even own a credit card. They're very anal about it. So this is where that focus instrument can also be a tool. Okay, do you feel, is finances an issue that y'all think might be a problem? Or so no, we're going to finances. We don't have a problem. If that's the case, we don't touch them. If finances is an issue, we'll make a few little comments here about finances, and then we'll give them some of the homework exercises that ask them to focus on finance, just to kind of tease it out and see if it really is an issue or not.
All right, let's look at the homework exercises in this section so that we can go over some of that and show you. The first one is on page 59A. What are my pearls of great price? This is an exercise that can be given to them to explore the values that they have and see which values that they might have in common. 59B is the next one, called the 10-statement autobiography. Put an asterisk on this one. We always use this one, and it's a great exercise for you to do together. Basically, it takes you through kind of a prayerful way. If you were going to write your own autobiography in 10 statements, that if somebody picked those 10 statements up and read them, they'd know something really about who you are. We kind of developed this years ago, really after doing a retreat when we were talking about who Jesus is. And Jesus' I am statements in the Gospel of John are designed by Jesus to help us get a clearer understanding of who he is. I am the bread of life. I am the way, the truth, and the life. I'm the resurrection and the life. I'm the good shepherd. I'm the sheep gate. You know, he's got 7 I am statements. And we sort of put together, this was years and years ago, this exercise that we did with married couples. So if you wanted to say who you are, put it in 10 statements. It was so successfully used with married couples that we started doing it with the engaged when we made the manual 13 years ago. And it's a great exercise to try to get them to focus on who they are, then to speak it out to each other, and then to come back to us, and when they read their 10 statements to us, we get a clearer picture of who they think they are. And it's amazing how they'll recognize, oh gosh, you know, my 10 statements were really negative. I didn't realize, or I didn't realize I had so many fears, or
worries, worriers.
Worries, worriers. It really reveals a lot. And again, this is where your notes and your understanding of their family of origin is so helpful. Because if you notice that in their 10 statements, if there's something serious that they reveal to you in their family of origin, there was, serious divorce, there was physical abuse, sexual abuse, there was, we've heard it all, incest, everything. If there's something significant in their past, and it never comes up in their family of origin, in their 10-statement autobiography, like it's all roses and daisies and rainbows. You know that they're not really dealing with it. And you can then say, gosh, that's really great that you have such a positive view of life and everything, but what about that incident from your family of origin? Again, you want to help them make connections to their life so that they're living in reality.
Yeah, because what should come out of here is not only, the values they hold most dear or the thing they fear the most, but a life experience that shaped me. Something that was really profound. If you need to know me, you need to know these 10 things about me. That's sort of the mindset. So it's one of our favorite exercises.
So when Lloyd and I did it, we've done it several times ourselves, one of his first statements included the fact that his father was an alcoholic who committed suicide, because that impacted his whole life and still does. It's still the lens through which he learned to see life. Anyway, now when you see in the box at the bottom of that page, it's the way that they share it with each other, those questions. One new thing I learned about you, one thing that wasn't clear in your statements I'd like to understand, one thing I'd add. Oftentimes when we're processing this exercise out, if the groom has just read us his 10 statements, I'll say to the bride, bride, if we'd never met him and you came over to our house and you wanted to tell us about him, are these the 10 statements? Are these the 10 things you would have said to tell us about him? And that's a good question for them to start thinking, well, no, I would have said he's this and this, It's good for them to articulate some of the things that they like about the person, or some things that they've noticed about the person they're marrying, and how that maybe he didn't say it in his 10 statements. So that's a very helpful exercise, and it gives you as the presenting couple a lot of information. So we always do that one. 59C, the next one, what will it be like, is a survey of my expectations. This is an exercise that we developed and then brought to our older children at the time years ago, who were newly, in their first 10 years of marriage. And they helped us expand and write this exercise. So it takes several different areas in marriage and gets them to look at what are my expectations about marriage in sharing my space, sharing my thoughts and feelings, sharing my money, sharing my bed, my faith, my responsibility for new life, and time with friends. It's a great exercise for culling out expectations. Now, if you look at page 59D, that's discussing your finances. 59E, or you two money opposites, and 59F is a budget worksheet. Lloyd always gives them this budget worksheet. Not necessarily that they have to do it and bring it back to us, But Lloyd sits with them for a couple minutes and just shows them the reasoning behind the way he designed this budget worksheet. He put it together to help them identify their short and long-term goals and to make sure they're on the same page with that. It's a very helpful exercise. The discussing your finances and are you two money opposites are good to expose their attitudes toward money. So we'll give them one of those. And then 59G is sharing your values. This is another one that we often use. And it kind of helps them to look at the values that they have and what's really important to them so that they're sharing. Okay, any questions about any of that we've talked about?
Oh, you said they each fill this out and then they share their answers, is what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay.
All right. So one of the things that one of the reasons you have some questions in that section on values is that, what we're trying to get them to realize, focus on, is that the goal of your marriage, and we say this to them in so many ways throughout, and it's in the manual, but I just want to say it explicitly because I don't think we've said it yet this afternoon or this morning. The goal of your marriage that we want to communicate to these couples isn't about happiness. It's not about living happily ever after and going to Disney World. It's about finding a sense of unity with one another. This is our call in the sacrament is to experience a deep sense of unity with one another. Now, unity, when I say unity, it doesn't mean sameness. It doesn't mean that you morph into the same personality or act the same way or dress the same way. It means that in the basic ways that you choose to live your life, practice your faith, spend your money, raise your kids, etc., you are on the same team. You've got each other's back. And so we always are going to be talking about things that build the unity of the couple versus create disunity. We all have known couples, and maybe it's happened to yourselves at times, who've experienced a crisis in their life. Maybe it was a loss of a job or a health crisis or the birth of a special needs child. And you think, gosh, how difficult that was. And yet how often you talk to a couple like that, 3 years down the road, 4 years down the road, they said, this was the best thing that ever happened to us. Why? Because it created unity. It brought them together to a point they knew that we knew we could depend on each other. And it's that sense of unity that gives that sense of fulfillment and happiness. So our goal is always to work on unity. That's why there's a number of these exercises deal with values, trying to make sure our values are on the same page.
I'm going to give you a little card that we give out on our married couples retreat. That it's our threefold statement of God's plan for married love. And it kind of reiterates that first point, especially that we say the goal of marriage is unity. But God's plan is that God desires husbands and wives to experience deep unity with one another, a unity that foreshadows the bond of love within the Trinity. God desires husbands and wives to love each other as God loves each of them, freely, totally, faithfully, and fruitfully. And God desires husbands and wives to help each other to grow in holiness. This is not what the culture's telling people about marriage, okay? This is what God's plan is, and it's what the whole goal of marriage preparation is, to try to help them to see that. All right, so this is what we're going to do, guys. It's a little past 12:30. They're setting up lunch for us real nicely. We'd like you to get your lunches, and you can start eating. We're going to eat real quickly. And in about 15 minutes, while you're finishing eating, we're going to go on to communications, because that is a dense section that